We have an update to an insane story in which 8 cruise passengers, 6 Americans, and 2 Australians were, in their own words, stranded and left to fend for themselves after they apparently had an issue during their shore excursion in the foreign port, causing them to be late and miss the cruise ship during their 21-day South African cruise. We have an update from Norwegian Cruise Line themselves. We also have some questions that need to be answered because there has been an additional story that's come out in which there was an 80-year-old woman that had an issue during the excursion, brought back to the ship, and then taken off the ship by the staff on board and put in a hospital for 24 hours, and she had not been contacted by anybody as far as her travel arrangements, and the family hadn't been contacted. It's a giant mess. The family that is not on board is claiming it's Norwegian's fault, and well, we'll go over the details. So the story has been understandably getting a lot of media attention. I do understand why. A bunch of Americans stuck in a foreign port. A cruise is supposed to be seen as one of the safest forms of travel. Apparently, it's also seen as a daycare in which full-grown adults need to be looked after 24/7. Now, when it comes to this situation, as it developed, more questions have been raised. For example, whenever this situation happened with the shore excursion, apparently the Coast Guard got involved and tried to take the passengers over to the ship, and they were denied boarding once the ship set sail. Apparently, what also happened during this exchange or interaction between the passengers trying to get back on and the Coast Guard, the staff on board the Norwegian Dawn, which is the ship they were sailing on, gave the passports to either one of the staff on board the tender boats or the Coast Guard and sent it back over to land. And people are asking, well, for starters, if the Coast Guard was able to take those passengers and bring them over to the ship, why didn't they just let them on board? Or if the passports were taken over there, if the passengers were there, why weren't they just allowed to get on board the tender boat and be taken to the cruise ship? For starters, there is a protocol. If a cruise ship starts sailing, they can't just let every Tom, Dick, and Harry board the ship while they are in motion or just simply stop for them. There are protocols that had to be adhered to. Imagine if everybody that was left by a cruise ship hopped on a jet ski, or even, let's say, the Coast Guard. It would set a precedence in which everybody would say, hey, look, there's Coast Guard nearby. Let's go ahead and bother them and have them just go take us over since we were irresponsible and missed the ship. Personally, I do say irresponsible in this particular case very loosely, because if there was indeed an issue during the excursion causing them to be late to the last tender boat, thus causing them to miss the ship, then, well, yes, that is an issue with the excursion team, sure. There's also rumors floating around in another article in which they say that the excursion that they allegedly took was sponsored by Norwegian Cruise Line, which brings us to the issue with another 80-year-old passenger by the name of Julia Linkoff. Apparently, she was on an excursion, presumably with the same group that eventually ended up having the complications into being late to the ship and eventually missing the Norwegian Dawn, when during her time in the excursion, she suffered some blurry vision and memory loss, apparently had a stroke. She was brought back to Norwegian Dawn, in which they deemed her situation was a little too severe for the onboard doctors to handle. They then took her off of the ship and put her in a hospital over in the South African island. 24 hours later, she was released, come to find out that the ship had left her, and somehow she managed to run into Jay and Jill. These were 2 other Americans that ended up also being left by the Norwegian Dawn. Eventually, 80-year-old Julia, while stranded over in South Africa, would get in contact with her daughter and son-in-law Kurt, who were apparently not on board the cruise at the time. However, they were listed as her emergency contacts, but this is where the conundrum is. Apparently, whenever this situation happened and Julia was taken off of the cruise ship and put in an African hospital for 24 hours, they are claiming, well, Kurt, the son-in-law, is saying, and he's been very vocal on Facebook, that they were never contacted to let them know Julia's whereabouts or the situation that had happened. Thankfully, according to him, they had Jay and Jill, 2 other Americans that were stranded over in Africa that were her guardian angels, making sure that she was taken care of until she was transported, I believe, over to Lisbon, Portugal, where she's currently in a hospital getting the help that she needs until she is able to safely transfer over to an American hospital or back home. My first initial thought process when hearing this unfortunate circumstance, and I want to be clear, I mean, no offense to the daughter, the son-in-law, or anyone out there that's a little older or seasoned, but why is an 80-year-old woman, presumably traveling by herself, traveling abroad on a 21-day cruise in South Africa? Once again, presumably by herself. I don't really understand that side of things. Maybe I'm just a little ignorant to the fact that maybe somebody that's older, I would assume she probably had either medical history or some pre-existing medical condition of some sort. That alone to me is a little curious. Nevertheless, I am also a little curious as to whether she had insurance for this cruise or not. But either way, if it is indeed true that Norwegian did not contact the daughter or the son-in-law whenever there was an actual emergency, then yes, that is going to raise some questions, because Norwegian should have indeed contacted the family if there is a problem with the family member. However, it is a relief to hear that she's getting the medical care that she needs over in Lisbon and will soon be flown back over to the United States. Norwegian, or NCL, did weigh in on two of these issues. One regarding Julia, stating that when she was disembarked with the staff off of the Norwegian Dawn, they did try to contact her because they can't contact, apparently, I guess in this case, the emergency contacts without consent of the passenger. That is a little weird. If that is indeed how all of that goes down, they need consent. But if somebody's incapacitated or they are unable to speak, how does all that work? I do have questions in regards to that. Norwegian has also said that when it comes to all of the passengers that ended up missing the ship, they will reimburse all of their flights that they did pay for in order to either get back to the ship or, I believe, back home in this case. Moral of the story here: if you decide to take a cruise excursion, especially one that is not sponsored or associated with the cruise line, make sure you look at all the reviews, go over all of the details, cross the T's and dot the lines. That's how that goes. Something like that. You know what I mean. But you want to make sure you verify and confirm with the tour operator upon arrival and meeting with them the time the ship is supposed to disembark. And maybe even, like I said in my previous video, if you want to be, let's say, a stickler or anal about it, you can ask them about their protocols in the event of an emergency to get them back to the ship, or potential insurance, or potential transportation in the event that they ended up being late to the ship and end up inevitably and unfortunately missing the cruise ship. Anywho, that is my 2 pesos on the matter. Of course, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section below. Hit that like button on your way out. Subscribe if you haven't already. And as usual, I love and appreciate every single one of you. I'll see you later. Take it easy.